Before we could start building our shed, we had some clearing out to do, starting with a dilapidated old building in the back corner of the yard filled to the brim with the previous owner's stuff, and a poorly built, cringeworthy bathroom.
All done? Hey, look at that.
We tackled the demo little by little, slowly chipping away at it one weekend at a time until the building and all the stuff inside was cleared out. We originally hoped to put the new shed here, but after discovering the concrete slab was a pieced-together, unusable mess, we decided to start from scratch on the other end of the yard. After hours and hours of demo, we finally had a clean slate. Our finished shed is going to be 12 feet by 16 feet, so we plan to make the gravel foundation 14 feet by 18 feet to leave a 1-foot border along the perimeter of the structure. We're going to be laying down 4 inches of gravel for our skid foundation to sit on, and since we didn't want the shed to be too high off the ground, we'll be digging down 4 inches so that the finished gravel pad will be relatively even with the rest of the yard. Since we had so much concrete to demo, the land we were left with was already a little lower than the rest of the yard, so it wasn't totally clear how much we needed to dig out. This rotary laser level we rented made easy work of it, after we figured out how to use it. We also could have used a regular laser level and a tape measure, but it's so bright outside that it was hard to see the laser line. We used 3/4 inch crushed stone for our pad. In order to move the mountain of gravel from the front of the driveway to the far back of the yard, we rented a mini skid steer along with a plate compactor. Renting this stuff gets expensive, and we only had the tools for the weekend, so we planned to tackle the bulk of this project over the course of one long weekend, where we both had Monday off, so we could try and get the gravel pad fully formed before having to return the tools. Since we had the skid steer, we decided to try and use it to help us do some digging. Our soil is very sandy, so the tiny tires on this thing ended up getting stuck in the ground, and we spent nearly an hour trying to get it out of the dirt. It's not the best tool for digging out a pad in this way, but after some fumbling around, we did manage to clear out most of what we needed to remove. Once we were roughly there, we used the plate compactor to press down the soil and lay out some string to mark the edges of the pad's perimeter. Then we did some fine-tuning by hand to finish off our leveling. Along the edges of the pad, we are going to be building a small retaining wall to hold back the gravel. In order to line up the top of the wall with the top of the gravel pad, we had to dig out a small trench a couple of inches down along the perimeter of the pad for the wall to sit inside. Our retaining wall was built using 4x6 pressure-treated lumber. We're going to have to join pieces together in order to span the full length of our perimeter, so I cut notches out on either side to create a half-lap joint for a stronger connection between boards. I started the cut with the circular saw, but since the saw blade isn't deep enough, I had to finish the cuts with the reciprocating saw, making sure to just lightly guide the blade through so it follows the path created by the circular saw. This is how they will fit together. And as with all pressure-treated wood, be sure to coat the freshly cut, exposed ends with preservative. The nasty chemicals used to keep the wood safe from the elements doesn't soak entirely into the wood, so cutting it leaves untreated parts exposed. To help hold the retaining wall in place, we're going to be adding bits of rebar every 6 to 8 feet that will anchor the wood to the ground, so we went ahead and pre-drilled the holes for the rebar before installing. We also added a bit of gravel to the trench to help with drainage. To see if we were square, we measured at a diagonal from corner to corner to see if the numbers matched up at least within an acceptable range. These are the structural screws that we used to connect the half-lap joints. We screwed in the corners from the outside and we added angle brackets to the corners on the inside, which probably wasn't entirely necessary, but we had them lying around. Then we backfilled with gravel, filling in the gaps in the retaining trench, and added the 2-foot-long pieces of rebar into the holes we pre-drilled. Before adding gravel, we added a weed barrier, also known as construction fabric, to protect against weeds. It is important to note that this material is still porous to allow water to drain properly and not end up pooling up underneath the shed. This is a pretty easy step. We just spread out the fabric and cut as we went, making sure to leave enough material to allow the fabric to run up on the sides of the retaining wall where we stapled it in place. And finally, at long last, it was time to put down some gravel. This is where the skid steer really came in handy. Aaron was able to grab a bucket load from the front of the driveway and carry it back to the pad. We started by dumping the stone into our gorilla cart so that I could move it around and spread it out, since the steer doesn't have a very deep reach and it would tear up the ground if we drove it into the pad. Then we just repeated the process over and over again, slowly filling up the pad. Eventually, we traded places so that I could have a go in the skid steer.
Okay, so press the red button.
Thanks to this mini skid steer, it took only a couple of hours to fill up the pad. We used the plate compactor to firmly press down the stone and then used a straightish piece of lumber to see if we were level, adjusting by adding and subtracting gravel as needed. The shed is going to be sitting on a skid foundation. Skids are really just hefty lumber anchored to the ground that the flooring system will be built on top of. Based on the size of our shed, we planned for 3 rows of pressure-treated 4x4s. Skids generally run the entire width of the shed perpendicular to the floor joists. Since we knew our shed was going to sit 12 inches in from the edge of the retaining wall, we measured and laid down the skids accordingly. Be sure to check the level as you go. Despite laying down what we thought was a totally level bed of gravel, there was still some fine tuning to do before the skids sat nice and flat and level. To attach the seams, we used tie plates and many screws. In order to anchor the skids into the ground, we found these shed anchors online. They screw into the ground and get bolted into the skids using this plate. I measured about a foot in on all corners and drilled the brackets in place. Then we inserted the anchors and drilled down into the ground. This was luckily much easier than pounding in the rebar.
That's a good demonstration.
With the gravel pad finished, we're ready to start building our flooring system. So if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel so you can stay updated on the progress of our shed and see what we're up to next.